Well, all eyes, of course, are on the economy this week, the markets as well. E.J. Antoni does an awesome job, an economist with the Heritage Foundation, joining us on 95.7 FM. He wrote a really good piece at Fox News late last week. And in this, he wrote, Trump's Liberation Day will create a golden age for workers. E.J., good morning. Thanks for being here in Kansas City. What's the premise behind that headline from your piece last week?
Well, the premise is essentially that we were supposed to get reciprocal tariffs last week, and that was going to essentially force other countries to the table. In other words, we tell them, look, we're just going to do to you what you've been doing to us. If you have tariffs and non-tariff barriers on our products, so maybe that includes things like quotas, maybe it includes currency manipulation, whatever the case may be, all of these different things, if you do that to us, we're going to do it to you. And the idea there is that'll force countries to drop all of those barriers to trade. And now our exporters can have better access to foreign markets. Here's the problem, though. That's not what we got last week.
Yeah, so now take me through what your concerns are now, a few days after the tariff plan has been rolled out.
Well, the biggest concern is that what was billed as being reciprocal tariffs, again, this whole idea of we're going to do to you what you've been doing to us, kind of like an economic version of the golden rule, I suppose. Instead of that, we got these made-up equations, quite frankly, where the math just doesn't add up here. We claim that certain countries have certain tariff rates on us, but in reality, if you read through the appendix, as it were, there is no such math there. Instead, all they did was they just looked at the trade deficit, and they didn't even look at the total trade deficit with some of these countries. They only looked at products and not services. So, for example, let's say I'm just taking a random country here, but let's say we buy $1 billion of Swiss watches from Switzerland, and we sell them $2 billion in financial services. That's a trade surplus for us on net, except according to this math, that counts that as a deficit, and it slaps Switzerland with a big penalty.
Okay, so when you look at this from a long game perspective, I've seen a lot of that criticism on that formula that was put out by the White House last week. If this is all just part of negotiating, is that something that I guess makes you potentially feel better about where this is headed, even if that formula was faulty in the way that it was rolled out?
It actually makes me feel worse from a negotiating standpoint for two reasons. One, it's the fact that you will have nations where they don't even have any barriers to trade, except we just slap penalty or punitive tariff rates on them. What do they have to negotiate? They can't lower any barriers to trade. So it's difficult to see how that helps anyone. The other problem is that we are essentially driving nations into China's orbit right now, which is the exact opposite of what we want. This is supposed to be America first, not America boxed out, and that's unfortunately what we're doing here. Instead of China, for example, having just a middle of the road penalty rate, they should have the highest rate. Nobody manipulates trade the way they do, whether it's utilizing slave labor or putting tariffs in place or using quotas or currency manipulation. I mean, I could go on, but China's the number one offender here.
So you want to see the tariff rates even higher because they were increased, 34%. You want to see China far and away getting hit with the highest rate and then everything else just much lower than it currently is?
That would be pretty close to reality, I think. Yeah, absolutely. Because again, if we actually look at how are these different nations around the world treating us, it doesn't matter if it's China or Germany or Japan, whatever the case may be. Let's actually have reciprocal trade here. Let's really do the hard work and the math of looking at tariffs and non-tariff barriers around the world, and from there, let's decide who should and who shouldn't have these high and low rates. And I can already tell you, looking at several of our very, very good trading partners, that they should have little to no tariffs because they don't have any barriers to trade. China has the most barriers to trade, and so they should have the highest rate. Again, not a middle-of-the-road rate.
Mm-hmm. E.J. Antoni is here, Heritage Foundation economist on 95.7 FM KCMO Talk Radio. So, listen, there's a lot of economists, folks that you know very well, who are in President Trump's orbit. What have you been hearing from them? Because there's a lot of free traders, of course, that have been around Donald Trump. I mean, Steve Moore and a lot of folks folks who are on this show all the time. What have you talked to them about over the last couple of days in terms of what's gone on and what may happen going forward?
There's a lot of disappointment, I think. Again, we were promised one thing. We were promised reciprocal trade, and that's what the president said he was going to deliver, and I think he's been let down. This seems to be the general consensus, getting back to your question. It seems like his advisors really let him down here. They told him we were going to get reciprocal tariffs, and instead they produced a product that is nothing of the sort. And so, again, that's not to say this is a total disaster that can't be salvaged, but we got to do the hard work of figuring out what would these reciprocal rates actually look like, and that needs to be what gets put in place. All this market turmoil we're seeing right now, the futures did not just plummet as soon as this announcement was made. The first thing they said was we're going to get a 10% across the board rate, and futures markets actually rallied a little bit. But then when they started showing these crazy charts with these made up numbers, that's when things really went south.
Is there a person, an advisor that you think is responsible for maybe some of the misguided ways that the tariffs have been implemented thus far?
Well, when I see Navarro and Lutnick get on TV and do some of their interviews, it definitely seems like they have some culpability here. And maybe I'm misreading things. I don't know either of those two men personally. In fact, I've never met either of them. So I'm just going off of the information everyone else has, which is what we see in public, what we see on TV, right? But it does seem like there is a disconnect between some of the things those folks are saying and reality. And since one is running the Commerce Department and the other is running trade, I have to imagine they had a very, very heavy hand in this.
So what do you think needs to happen here when it comes to the goal, which is rebuilding a middle class in this country, and how you go about doing it in a fairly efficient way, knowing that, of course, in American politics, time is never on your side? What would that ideally look like, EJ and Tony?
Well, we got to get this tax bill done. This what they did with all these tariffs before having the deregulation done and the tax cuts done and the other pro-growth agenda items. What they did essentially was they took the drowning middle class and they threw an anchor to them before building the boat. And so this is only going to make things worse. It's imperative that they get the tax cut across the finish line and that they do it as soon as possible. That has a lot of different moving parts. I get it. One really great thing they can do there, though, would be to take this 10% tariff and turn that into what they call a border adjustment tax and put that into statute. And what that would do is actually generate probably about $600 billion, and you could use that to offset income taxes. In other words, you could get rid of about $600 billion worth of income taxes for the American middle class by making that swap. That things like that would be a great move. But again, they got to move quick if they're going to counteract the negative effects from this tariff policy.
So, EJ, as you look at the week ahead, then what are you keeping an eye on when it comes to how this tariff and these trade wars play out, and what you think needs to happen to basically solve this thing as quickly as possible? As I stare at your buddy Peter Navarro, who was just on CNBC a few minutes ago, by the way.
Oh boy. Look, I think we got to keep an eye on the White House. I hear a lot of rumors about countries apparently coming to the table to negotiate in order to get these rates down. But I'm also hearing rumblings that's not true. So it's like, all right, what are you supposed to believe, right? Unless you're in the room, you don't know. So take everything you hear with a grain of salt, but do keep your eyes and your ears on the White House in the weeks ahead for developments here. We really got to hope that some negotiations get done and that this gets resolved, either to get rid of these rates or to reevaluate their methodology so that we actually have reciprocal tariffs, because that's what we want. We want reciprocal trade. We don't want less free trade. We want more free trade. The problem that we've had, getting back to your question of how do we rebuild the middle class, the problem has been government getting in the way, either our government regulating business out of existence and driving factories overseas, or foreign governments regulating trade so that our exporters, so that our workers can't sell their products in foreign markets. We want free trade, and we want it to the nth degree possible.
All right. E.J. Antoni, Heritage Foundation. Appreciate it, my friend. Thanks for the insight as always. And it's going to be a crazy week to watch unfold. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right. E.J. Antoni, Heritage Foundation on KCMO.